Your new book, Nourish, the definitive plant-based nutrition guide for families with pediatrician Rishma Shah, discusses nutrition for families with an emphasis on pregnancy, lactation, and nutrition for children. Are vegan diets really safe and adequate for small children?
Well, they are, and I'll just show you the book. This is the new book. Let's see, can you see it? It's just a gorgeous cover. It just came out in November of 2020, and Reshma Shah is actually a pediatrician, and so it was really fun to work with a pediatrician on this project, and she is just so balanced in her thinking. It was a joy to partner with her. And so getting to the question, are vegan diets really safe and adequate for children? It really all depends on how well they're designed, like any diet. But in the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics position statement on vegetarian diets, they very unequivocally state that well-planned plant-based diets are safe and nutritionally adequate during all stages of the life cycle, including during infancy and childhood. But as I mentioned, a plant-based diet, like any diet, needs to be well planned in order to maximize nutritional benefit and minimize risk of deficiencies. And plant-based diets do tend to be high in fiber. And while that's almost always a good thing, for small children who have little tiny stomachs, the diet can get bulky. So it makes sense to sort of moderate fiber intake for children by adding lower fiber foods like peanut butter and tofu, and even maybe some pasta in there. And generally, we need to think about how to meet needs for nutrients that may be questionable. And we can talk more specifically about those. But generally, we may need to include some supplements as well. But studies have shown that children eating plant-based diets that are sufficient in calories and variety and have the appropriate supplementation, those vegan children grow just as well as children eating omnivorous diets. And and the other thing that I think to consider is not only can children eating plant-based diets have adequate growth and development, but actually there have been studies showing that the overall quality of the diet is actually superior. Children eating plant-based diets tend to have higher intakes of fruits and vegetables. They tend to have healthier body weights. They actually eat more of things like legumes, nuts, and seeds. They eat fewer sugars and sugar-sweetened beverages. They eat less saturated fat. So there are a lot of potential benefits with a plant-based diet for children. And of course, long-term, we're instilling these healthy eating patterns that will support a healthy diet as they become adults and reduce the risk of all of these chronic diseases like hypertension and high cholesterol and diabetes and all of those sort of lifestyle induced diseases. So there's no reason to think that a vegan diet can't adequately nourish a child.
What are the nutrients most commonly lacking in diets of toddlers? How can we be sure plant-based toddlers do not fall short?
Yeah, so the key nutrients of concern for toddlers are usually vitamin D and iron, and for all toddlers, regardless of dietary pattern. So that's why we recommend vitamin D drops from pretty much from birth and until at least 12 months of age. But for many parents, it would be continued throughout childhood. And a child's iron stores actually start to run out somewhere between 4 and 6 months of age. So the American Academy of Pediatrics actually suggests that at 4 months, we begin providing iron at a rate of about 1 milligram per kilogram body weight until they're consuming enough iron from solid foods. And that's not just for plant-based children, it's for all children. And it's really important to know that preemies or premature babies don't have those iron stores, so they need to be supplemented with iron from birth. Now, parents of plant-based toddlers also want to ensure reliable sources of vitamin B12 and iodine. Those are two nutrients that may not be found in sufficient amounts in plant-based diets. So vitamin B12 is super, super important. And what we want to do, for B12 is to provide fortified foods and probably a supplement of about 250 micrograms, maybe twice a week for a preschool child, and you can get drops for that. Iodine is another one that can be an issue, especially for parents that don't use iodized salt or seaweed. And so toddlers need about 90 micrograms of iodine a day. So that, you can do a few things to achieve that. So you can do, a quarter teaspoon of iodized salt, or you can do a little bit of seaweed and, like a quarter teaspoon of dulse granules, or a few sheets of nori. Usually nori has about 20 to 40 micrograms per sheet. So you could do maybe 2 sheets of nori or something like that. But it's also an option if you're doing a multivite, is to pick one with iodine as well. And then the other nutrients that do come up, which I think deserve some consideration, are calcium, zinc, and omega-3 fatty acids. And a lot of people think protein is a concern. So I'll talk about each of those briefly, but protein is less of a concern than many people believe it to be. And in fact, the most recent study we have was done on 430 toddlers, and these were aged 1 to 3 years. This was in Germany. There were 139 vegans, and then the rest were consuming other dietary patterns. All the dietary groups had well in excess of the RDA for protein. So the RDA for protein at this age, for this age category, is about 1.05 grams per kilogram body weight. Well, the omnivores averaged 2.7 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. The vegetarians, 2.3, that's the lacto-ovo vegetarians, and the vegans were 2.4. So they were all over double what they needed to be. So there were no issues getting enough protein for these toddlers. And in this study, they didn't observe any differences in growth or energy intakes, regardless of dietary pattern. All their micronutrient intakes were adequate. And you also have to remember that most Western diets, just think about this when you think, oh, well, vegan, you have to supplement with B12, so that makes it not good. Well, if you think about Western diets, we have for many, many decades fortified foods as we've needed to. So for example, we add vitamin D to milk, we add iron to infant cereal, we add iodine to salt, we add B vitamins to flour products and rice, to safeguard against nutritional deficiencies for the population. And as we shift towards a more plant-based diet, food fortification will adapt to, a more plant-based dietary pattern, and we'll start adding B12 and perhaps zinc and long-chain omega-3 fatty acids to foods, as need be. But to ensure that toddlers don't fall short, there are some really simple things you can do. You can follow in Nourish. We have a nice food guide with amounts of foods and so forth that would be recommended. But you want the diet to include a good variety of plant foods. So including legumes and whole grains and vegetables and fruits and nuts and seeds. You do not want to do a low-fat diet for young children. They need about 30 to 40% of calories from fat at that age. So we need to provide adequate fat sources. And so we're looking at things like, nut and seed butters and avocados, and you can even use some oils as well. You want to choose fortified non-dairy milk. So because, particularly for calcium and vitamin D, you get that little, boost from these foods. So 1 cup of fortified non-dairy milk can have 300 to 450 milligrams of calcium, which makes it very easy to meet the 700 milligrams that are recommended in this age category. So, and you also want to, choose the more nutrient dense milks like soy milk or pea milk, as opposed to something that is very low nutritionally like almond milk. Even though it's got the calcium and vitamin D, it doesn't have a lot of protein or other trace nutrients. And I would continue offering the additional vitamin D as drops or a liquid multi. And then we talked about the amount of B12, couple, 250 micrograms twice a week, or 10 micrograms a day you could do as well. one thing that you can do to ensure iron adequacy for toddlers is to continue to use infant cereal, and you can use it, in pancakes, and you can use it in muffins, and you can use it sprinkled on oatmeal or stirred in oatmeal to give a little extra boost of iron as well. And then you want to choose foods as a part of the regular diet that are rich in zinc. Things like legumes and pumpkin seeds and cashews and things like that are helpful. The other thing that's a little more controversial is whether or not EPA, DHA are beneficial. And I would suggest that it makes sense to add them, and 70 milligrams a day would be a reasonable amount at this age. I don't see any potential adverse effects of doing so, and there are potential benefits in terms of cognitive function long term with ensuring a source. So I would do that.